Good morning. It's Tuesday, the 31st of October here in London. This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu dismisses calls to quit and rules out a ceasefire.
The Bank of Japan allows long-term yields to edge higher, but disappoints those that wanted more.
Plus, putting a cross through his $50 billion purchase. Elon Musk's X is now worth less than half what he paid for it.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe for this Tuesday, the 31st of October in London. Coming up today.
Netanyahu digs in. Israel's leader dismisses calls to quit and rules out a ceasefire.
Behind the curve, the Bank of Japan allows long-term yields to edge higher.
Apple opts for the Big Mac. Tech giant unveils a raft of new super-fast chips and PCs.
Plus, putting a cross through his $50 billion purchase, Musk's X, now worth less than half what he paid for it.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, on DAB Digital Radio London, Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington DC, Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM Channel 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning from London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. You're listening to Daybreak Europe live on London DAB Radio.
Let's start with a check of the markets. The Japanese yen is down 0.7% this morning, 150.10 against the US dollar. Yields are higher after the Bank of Japan tweaked its yield curve policy. 10-year JGB yields around 0.94%. Japanese equities are higher this morning, unlike most of the rest of the Asian market. Chinese factory activity sinking the Hang Seng down by 1.8% this morning. Stock futures for the US down 0.4% for the S&P 500. US stocks 600 futures also down 0.1%, and 10-year Treasury yields easing 2 basis points to 4.87%. Those are the markets.
Our top stories this morning. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has dismissed calls for him to resign over security failures that led to the October 7th Hamas attack. 1,400 people are now known to have died that day, the largest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust. Speaking to reporters in Tel Aviv, Netanyahu rejected criticism of his leadership and vowed to push on with the ground offensive in Gaza.
The only thing that I intend to have resign is Hamas. We're going to resign them to the dustbin of history. That's my goal, that's my responsibility, and that's what I'm leading the country to do.
Netanyahu also ruled out a ceasefire in the 3-week-old conflict. Authorities in Hamas-run Gaza said the death toll since the war has erupted has surpassed 8,300 people, and United Nations officials said more than 1.4 million people have been internally displaced in Gaza.
There are now increasing signs that the conflict risks spilling over into neighbouring countries. Overnight, Israeli fighter jets struck infrastructure targets in Lebanon, including weapons, posts and sites that the military says were being used by Hezbollah. The United Nations Special Envoy for Syria has also warned that the conflict between Israel and Hamas is spilling into that country. Geir Pedersen told the UN Security Council that the situation is now, quote, at its most dangerous for a long time. Israel has carried out airstrikes inside Syria, while US bases there have also been targeted in attacks blamed on Iran-backed militias.
In other news, the Bank of Japan has adjusted its bond buying programme to allow long-term yields to edge higher while also raising its inflation projections. Although modest, the move signals that the BOJ may now be inching towards scrapping its yield curve control. Sayuri Shirai was a member of the central bank's policy board until 2016. She told Bloomberg it's a significant shift.
Today, they raised this reference rate to 1%, so they are not going to defend this 1% yield. So it means they don't want to purchase a lot of government bonds. So this is a very strong signal that they are going to allow more flexibility on the 10-year yield. So eventually, this might lead to the further normalization of monetary policy.
Despite Sayuri Shirai's view, the yen weakened after the announcement, suggesting that traders still believe the central bank is committed to its stimulus stance.
Now, China's factory activity fell back into contraction in October. Bloomberg's Brian Curtis has more from Hong Kong.
The official PMI fell to 49.5 in October, the estimate 50.2. In addition, an expansion of the services sector unexpectedly eased. The reading suggests the economy remains fragile and needs further support. The non-manufacturing gauge declined to 50.6 from 51.7 in September, also lower than forecast. The numbers are skewed due to an 8-day holiday at the beginning of the month. But let's not quibble, demand remains weak. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg Radio.
Apple has announced a new iMac laptops and the third generation of its in-house Mac processor line. The announcement was part of the tech giant's self-described Halloween scary fast branded product launch. Apple says the new chip lineup relies on advanced 3nm manufacturing technology and more efficiently handles graphics processing. More now from Bloomberg's Tom Giles.
What they're trying to show is that the new line of chips that they've just unveiled, the M3, is a kind of chip that's faster, more powerful, and at the same time more energy efficient. So what they're trying to do is they're using this new chip to breathe life into their Mac product line. We saw a big boost in Mac sales in the time of the pandemic when everybody was staying home and refreshing their laptops and working from home. And then since then, we've seen a little bit more of a slowdown in recent quarters.
Tom Giles says that by using in-house chips, Apple believes it can tailor its hardware and software to create a better overall user experience. The firm will be hoping the launch will restore its advantage in the industry and get the Mac business back on track.
X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, is worth less than half of what Elon Musk paid for it a year ago. More now from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
A source tells Bloomberg restricted stock units awarded to employees value the company at $19 billion or $45 a share. A year ago, Musk bought Twitter for $44 billion. Since the takeover, most of Twitter's staff was laid off or resigned. Musk renamed the company X, changed some of its content rules, and has since lost more than half of its ad revenue. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
Coming up a little later on, we're going to bring you a special conversation that we've been having to mark the end of Black History Month about the experience of being black and working in the City of London, both at a senior level and for someone whose career is just starting out. That a little later in the programme.
First, though, let's bring you up to date with the latest developments from the Middle East now. Israel's Prime Minister dismissing calls for him to resign and ruling out a ceasefire in the country's war with Hamas. Let's get the latest now from our head of Middle East and North Africa, Stuart Livingston-Wallace. Stuart, great to have you with us. This was a defiant press conference from Benjamin Netanyahu last night. No signs of a change in strategy from Israel.
Yeah, good morning. Well, I would say no change of strategy in the past few days because... Well, we don't know this for a fact, but obviously there does appear to have been quite a major change of strategy from the original assumption, at least, that there was going to be an all-out assault. So, this is now the second phase of the war where it is on a much lower level than I think most people were anticipating, and that seems to have come from two or three main things. Number one, the number of foreign leaders that sort of troop their way into Tel Aviv to sort of urge caution, obviously the continuing hostage situation, and then finally clear signs that there were elevated risks of conflict breaking out, particularly in the north with Hezbollah, but also further afield with sort of Syria, Iraq, and down in the south from the Houthis in Yemen. So at the moment, the strategy seems to be, much lower levels of incursions coming in from the north and the east, sort of heading towards Gaza City. But it's very hard to tell what exactly the strategy is right now.
So Bloomberg also has learnt that the head of Israel's intelligence service, Mossad, travelled to Qatar as part of the efforts to secure the release of hostages held by Hamas. This is obviously the other major issue. What more can you tell us about, how that took place?
Well, not much, truthfully, and I was in Doha myself yesterday, so I can tell you from the ground, I don't have a great deal to tell you. What we do know, obviously, is that Qatar's been working pretty much flat out since this whole thing kicked off, and obviously so far has found limited success with only a handful released out of the 200 plus that we know were taken. But that, of course, doesn't mean that there won't be more, and that doesn't mean that they're not making headway. As often these things go, you don't hear anything, and then suddenly there's a great success. So Qatar in general punches far above its weight when it comes to difficult situations. And you think of the American prisoners released by Iran, getting the Americans out of Afghanistan, Ukrainian children out of Russia. None of these are easy things to do. So it is a pretty impressive operator. But I'm afraid with this one, everything tends to be rather silent until you get the hostages actually come out.
We're also watching the latest movements in Washington as regards the next aid package for Israel as well. House Republicans publishing their own plan to give more help to Israel.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably going to slow things down quite a bit, or at least that's our assumption. I mean, the bottom line here is that, the new spending is likely to stall in the Senate unless there are substantial revisions. Now, quite what that means in terms of time frame, really hard to predict. And I think everyone sort of secondarily is worried that by splitting this up, what might that mean for aid for Ukraine as it goes on the counteroffensive against Russia again? That I think is a much broader concern.
Also, in terms of on the ground, has there been any sign of humanitarian aid or increased humanitarian aid going to Gaza?
No sign yet. I mean, we were told by the Israelis yesterday that the number of trucks should increase to about 100. So that's sort of in the order of, 3-4 times, a little bit more even what we've been seeing in the previous days. But the reality, of course, is that even at 100 trucks, that's about a fifth of what was going in before the conflict. And again, the context here, 2 million people in Gaza, 100 trucks a day is just not going to cut it in terms of the amount of aid that's really needed, particularly in the context of there being electricity shortages, certainly shortages of fuel to hospitals and that sort of thing to keep the generators going. So it's definitely an improvement, but probably nowhere near what most people would think would be needed.
Stuart, we're also watching closely for any signs of regional escalation as well. More airstrikes from Israel on Hezbollah targets in Lebanon overnight.
Yeah, I mean, the tensions are definitely still high on that border. Although it must be said at the same time that so far it appears that Hezbollah doesn't really want to get fully engaged. Now, we don't know if that's just general reluctance or it's waiting for Israel to commit more troops into Gaza. It's very hard to tell. But I should sort of add on top of that, I think where people really need to be focused right now is Syria. And as you mentioned, in the introduction to this, we had the UN rapporteur came out and kind of gave a very stark warning along the lines of, it was already a bit of a tinderbox and things are definitely getting worse. So we've seen numerous attacks on the US military in Syria and in Iraq. You've seen sort of stepped up airstrikes from Israel into Syria, and what was already a very, very volatile situation is likely to get worse, and then that obviously has this spillover effect right across the region. So that's definitely one we need to keep an eye on.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Stuart Livingston-Wallace is Bloomberg's head of Middle East and North Africa coverage, bringing us the latest developments from the Middle East and the Israel-Hamas war.
Today is the last day of Black History Month in the UK. It's an event that many companies in the city have celebrated, but Black, Asian and minority ethnic people are still underrepresented in financial services. A 2022 Race to Equality survey found that almost 7 in 10 ethnic minority workers in the UK financial services felt they'd experienced discrimination at work.
So we wanted to bring you a conversation about the experience of being a black person working here in the Square Mile. We brought together a graduate at insurance firm Gallagher and a managing director from Morgan Stanley to discuss the importance of role models and how they feel underrepresentation of black people in financial industries could be addressed.
Let's take a listen now to that conversation.
I'm Colin Chambers. I work at Gallagher in construction broking, the international team. I'm on the grad scheme. This is my second year.
My name is Tosin Akindui. I'm a managing director at Morgan Stanley, and I've been at the firm 20 years.
I support Chelsea. Big reason I support Chelsea because of Michael Essien. He's a Ghanaian black role model for me. A lot of people where I'm from, or East London, they support Arsenal because of players like Thierry Henry, and they want to be a footballer and play for Arsenal because of Thierry Henry. In the city, definitely you want to see someone that is successful in the city, because I feel like there's a bit of narrative and stereotypes that the city is mainly white people when you walk in, and there's a lot of maybe a lack of diversity. People might think that from first assumption, but I feel like when you get in the city, you'll be surprised as well, because there are black leaders there. So be able to identify with those black leaders and relate to them is really important to feel like you can be successful in a city where you are the minority.
When I look at my career and when I started out, decades ago, there wasn't the obvious role modeling at senior levels of Black heritage. There were not that many. Obviously, there's been vast improvements there, really identifying and training and retaining Black excellent talent. And so there's more representation now than there was before. And a lot of people who have worked as long as I have, who have Black heritage, will have that same feeling of not kind of looking around and seeing people who might have had a similar path or similar background, especially when it comes to ethnicity and culture. But the reality is that there's been progression. It's not been linear. There's more wood to chop. Absolutely. But once you are in a place where you have achieved certain things, and you yourself, Colin, are a role model, you begin to role model right from the start of your career. And there are people who will come to you, or you could offer advice to about how you've done that in your kind of environment. So the role modeling is really about paying it forward.
You won't live the same career that Tosin has, or another Black man or another Black lady has. So you have to navigate and also sort of take responsibility of your career and lean on different people, take everything with a pinch of salt as well, and try and relate to where you think their advice will be relevant to you.
If you're going into a work environment where you are spending 9, 10, 11, 12 hours a day, it could be longer depending on what's going on in your industry, to have to navigate a performance every day that's not true to who you are is absolutely exhausting and takes away from you actually performing a job to the best of your ability. So when we talk about role models, one of the things I would say to people, such as yourself, Colin, is that when we're looking at role models or a skill we want to develop or something we want to hone and perfect, it's looking at the people who do it best, whoever they are, wherever they're from. And it's great that there are a lot more people of Black heritage to call on other ethnicities as well within the city. But who does it best in a way that resonates with me?
Yes.
And is true to me? And now I want to find out a bit more about that.
With unconscious bias, I feel like you have to be aware of it before you know it exists. Me being very young as well and new in the industry, I feel like you're young, you might not know, you could be naive. You definitely need to have a wide eye for that and also be aware of that. But also know that you can talk to people, make them aware of things that you might not agree with and things that could be improved in whatever industry you're in.
One of the things you said that is so amazing, and it's great, it actually should not be amazing, is that you feel comfortable talking about it.
Yeah.
And that's the environment you want in a corporate setting. And Mossad is very much the same. And you want to be in an environment where you can talk about it. And I think if you go back 30, 40 years, there was not the narrative, the language. How do you talk about it? People were not comfortable talking about race at all. There's a lot more comfort in that and people willing to kind of make mistakes and be corrected than there was 30, 40 years ago. So it's great that you are perceiving that and feeling empowered to do that. The other thing I would say was, when I was starting out, a lot of the time there would be some form of unconscious bias people would perceive, and it would be like, oh, I didn't correct it right then and there in the moment. The moment has passed. The moment has never passed. It's never passed. It could be 3-4 days. It could be a while before you realize, oh yeah, that's particularly what made me uncomfortable. And now I want to rectify that, address it, discuss it. And that's what makes someone feel more comfortable in their environment as well.
How I see it from my perspective is that I have to have the short-term uncomfortable conversations as a trade-off for long-term discomfort.
I do think that one of the things that we might miss the mark on in the corporate setting, and when we look at Black History Month and unconscious bias, etc., any other kind of bias, is that some of it is not happening in the workplace. It happens in the communities where we live, work, shop, but it's not in the office. And for anybody who experiences unconscious bias, they can bring that into work on a Monday based on something they experienced on the weekend, and it's kind of shrouded around them because it's real. And so I think this whole concept of having an environment in which one can talk freely about these challenges, how it makes them feel, and have a toolkit and an understanding of how to navigate it is so important to success and resilience.
Me coming to the city, I just wanted to be in the city. I wanted to look smart. I wanted to look professional, and I felt like that was a sort of ego boost, if I'm being candidly honest. So I didn't know what anyone done in the city. I just knew it looked like a good thing to be in. I do feel like it's hidden from a lot of Black professionals and ethnic minorities, not only Black professionals. No one really knows what goes on in the city, just churns out a lot of money. I feel like educating the young professionals as well having a strategic approach to like outreach programs as well. So reaching different schools, not even only schools, because some people, they leave school at 18.
Yep.
So trying to find spaces where we might find the talent.
When you look at our client bases, they're so diverse. They want diversity of thought, diversity of problem solving, diversity of approach. But it also enriches our environment as well to have that variation, and it represents our society. So I think more of the same at what I would call the entry level, and we see that diversity coming to bear in the apprentice programs as well. Amazing source of talent. When we talk about retention, and we go back to the cultural piece as well, because it's not just ethnicity, there's a cultural aspect as well. I think a lot of focus across the financial industry and many industries is about the quality and the efficiency of the management team. Managers have to manage individuals, not cookie cutter. You've got to invest in the individual. What motivates them? What would be a stretch? What are their aspirations? Where are they in their life? And you do that by really devoting the time to each individual, and you get the best out of them. And that's agile management. And that benefits all employees, not just Black heritage, but that's what needs to happen. And I think that's the critical piece now. We're getting talent in. We need to advance it, retain it, so that we've got leaders of tomorrow. My advice to someone who is exploring a career in the city is be aware of forums, networks, organizations. Everything's there now. In a way, it wasn't there. Not giving away my age when I was at a similar stage, where you can just go online and find out where people are gathering, and you can network, and you can ask people questions about what gets them excited to go to work.
Definitely be brave. Be brave in your decisions. Be bold. Don't hide because you feel like you're the minority. You're here for a reason if you're in the city. So clearly you have something to show, something to give. So I feel like having that faith in yourself and being self-confident and not trying to hide and just go under the radar. I feel like you've got to be brave and put yourself out there.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.